Honorable Secretary, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Shri the extremely distinguished Shri Jawahar Sarkar, Chief Executive Officer of Prasar Bharati, our honored guest, Mr. Vern Fotheringham, if I get the pronunciation of the name right, who was our keynote speaker, Mr. A.K. Dikshit, Mr. P.K. Singh, my senior colleagues, Mr. Jiten Shankar Mathur, Supriya Sahu, member personnel in the board of Prasar Bharati, Brigadier Hussain, member finance, Mr. Pandit, the Director General of the All India Radio, Mr. Venkatesh Velu, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to commence by congratulating the Broadcast Engineering Society of India for putting together this magnificent expo and a very stimulating conference to follow. I want to laud your efforts for getting experts from across the globe to showcase their technologies year after year, ever since it was established in 1987. Conferences such as these not only help promote vanguard solutions and innovative technologies, but also ensure a confluence of Indian and global ideas in this sector. When I came to this conference last year, I had but barely taken over as the Minister of Information and Broadcasting. And to be very candid and honest, the last 14 months has been a learning curve, steep on most occasions, but pleasurable nonetheless. Unlike a large number of very distinguished technical people, both on the dais and in the audience, I must confess that I am fairly technologically challenged, so therefore my understanding of the finer nuances of technology are rather limited. But as someone who was a lawyer in my previous avatar, I do understand that it is extremely imperative and important that if any sector has to grow and flourish, it must have a stable and a predictable regulatory regime. And the one thing which I was completely struck by was the fact that in the broadcasting space, ever since we liberalized in the early 90s, I think 1991 and 1992, if I remember correctly, broadcasting has perhaps been that unique sector where the march of technology has succeeded and outpaced regulation, rather than regulation laying the framework in which technology and the liberalization of the sector should really have taken place. And as the Honourable Secretary was very correctly mentioning, that over the past 2.5 decades, if my memory serves me correctly, we have issued in the television space about 800 odd licenses. BES permanent setup at Delhi headquarters, with all due respects to the plurality of the Indian broadcasting space, it is my very humble personal opinion that perhaps this has been one of the corrosive legacies of liberalization. And the reason I say that with a sense of responsibility is because if you juxtapose the liberalization of the broadcasting sector with the liberalization of the telecom sector, and I spent quite a few years in the telecom courts over a period of time, you would find that even today in a telecom circle which roughly corresponds to a state, you have about 6 or 7 players, at best 8 players. If you were to sort of extrapolate that to the broadcasting paradigm, you have 800 odd players, out of which 395 odd are in the news space. And if you go by the conventional figures which are available, news and current affairs occupies about 7% of the entire broadcasting universe. So the fact remains that you have about 800 odd news channels who are competing for a market share in an environment which is completely advertising driven rather than subscriber driven or subscriber revenue driven. And on one hand, while we can celebrate the plurality and the diversity of the market, on the other hand, I think we also must be cognizant of the fact that market fragmentation at this level does breed its own aberrations and bring in its own angularities, which at times has a very deleterious impact on the level and on the gravitas of the discourse which all of us imbibe and assimilate on a regular basis. So therefore, the couple of things that we were able to do in the past 14 months with the help of my extremely eminent and venerable colleagues was try and put in place a regulatory framework which would then make the entire environment more stable and predictable. We set up an interministerial committee in order to consider all the recommendations which came in from the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India on references which were made by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And we have been able to take a view with regard to not allowing government entities, political entities in the broadcasting space, whereby effectively prescribing that Prasar Bharati would continue to remain the only public broadcaster which has a component of government funding, and the rest of the space would really be left to private initiative and to private players to sort of come and compete and be able to disseminate content as they feel like. Simultaneously, what we've also been able to do recently is that over a period of time, there have been representations from the industry that the entire system of measurement of television audiences, which drives the appropriation and the distribution of advertising revenues, is unfortunately broken and therefore requires to be fixed. It had been a debate which dates back almost to the time when we opened up the broadcasting sector. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India gave recommendations in 2008. We set up a committee under the current Finance Minister of West Bengal, who was then Secretary General of the FICCI, Mr. Amit Mitra, to try and find a solution to this problem. The ministry, under the able guidance of our officers, worked with the industry to try and create the Broadcasting Audience Research Council so that it would be an industry-led effort. But simultaneously, there was a feeling that we need to put in place a transparent mechanism whereby not only the industry, not only the stakeholders, but ordinary people at large would know as to how the popularity of television programs is measured. And I must report that after a great deal of deliberations, we've been successful in getting through on the 9th of January 2014 a decision by the Cabinet whereby there would be policy guidelines in place which would ensure that not only would the television rating system become accountable, become auditable, become transparent, but more importantly would become broad-based. Because if you look at the television universe, 15.4 crore television homes, if I remember correctly, if they are going to be benchmarked by a sample size of 10,000 odd people's meters, I do not think that it reflects the reality of television viewership in India. And to a very great extent, I think the credit must also go to Mr. Jawahar Sarkar and his colleagues, who, for the lack of a better expression, took the bull by the horns, took it to the Competition Commission. As I speak, I believe, Mr. Sarkar, there is an inquiry which is already in progress. So therefore, I think in the medium term and in the long term, we would have a situation whereby the entire rating mechanism, the audience measurement mechanism, would not only become far more accountable, but far more stringent as we speak. Another very great aberration which is there in the broadcasting space has been the distribution monopolies, which unfortunately are a reality of life in many parts of India. There is a saying that if content is king, in broadcasting, distribution is God. And unfortunately, the gods of distribution, in most cases, also very powerful political players in their respective states, were effectively able to create a stranglehold, whereby television channels which were inimical to their interests, or even Prasar Bharati, the public broadcaster, were repeatedly blacked out, at times because of commercial considerations, at times because of considerations which were far from noble. And therefore, we made a reference to the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India that these monopolies in the distribution space need to be broken down. We are very happy to report that TRAI came back with comprehensive recommendations, and as we speak, an interministerial committee is in the process of considering those recommendations, and I think we will be able to put in place a regime whereby no single entity would have monopoly over broadcasting in any state of India. And concurrently, by regulation, we have ensured that all the 29 odd channels which the public broadcaster disseminates are a must carry in every distribution platform, be it DTH, be it cable, or be it any other platforms. The short point that I was trying to make is that our effort in the ministry over the past 14 months has been to try and put a very stable, a very transparent, a very predictable regulatory regime in place, which would provide a level playing field to all the different entities. And as we speak, talking about distribution, you must have read in the papers today that one or two odd television channels which were reporting content which unfortunately was not to the liking of certain players in the political arena have been ostensibly blacked out. And that is why I think it becomes very important for all stakeholders, especially the public broadcaster and people who have a stake in public broadcasting in India, to see that we have a regime in place whereby no individual, no government is ever able to black out, block, or ostracize any content which is being disseminated, but that imposes a corresponding responsibility on the broadcasters also to try and shun sensationalism and to try and put out content which both has a modicum of propriety and also has a certain modicum of sobriety, so that the public discourse in this country remains critical but does not become corrosive. I could not agree with what Mr. Sarkar had said more when he talked about the entire FM paradigm. If there has been one big success in this country over the past 2 decades, it has been the whole telecom revolution. As we speak, there are about 90 crore or 900 million mobile telephones in this country. And not only has this technology proliferated, or not only has mobile telephony proliferated to the last man at the last row, but it has done so at the cheapest call rates anywhere in the world. And therefore, it is extremely imperative for all of us and the public broadcaster to ensure that we leverage this frequency modulation paradigm which is available to us, and ensure that the radio space is broadened, the radio space is made far more expansive, and our transmission is able to reach out to each and every person who has a mobile phone which has the capacity to be able to receive a frequency modulated transmission. I know Mr. Sarkar has been pushing us extremely hard, and to some extent we have come up short in not being able to keep pace with the urgency which Prasar Bharati has been exhibiting in this particular arena. But I would like to assure him and all his colleagues that insofar as the FM paradigm is concerned, whatever support is required from the ministry would be available to Prasar Bharati, so that you can leverage this and become an early mover in ensuring that you have the largest FM-based network in the country. Mr. Julka spoke about community radio. I think that is another area which has enormous potential. In some parts of the country, community radio has taken off. Not only has it become an incubator for local culture, local folk music, but more importantly for disseminating local information. After the unfortunate happenings in Uttarakhand early last year in summer, in fact, we have been approached by the Uttarakhand government to see if we can put community radios in place, because when that unfortunate event took place, when the deluge happened, the only source of information which was available to a lot of people who were marooned in the hills and in inaccessible places was the AIR network and what All India Radio was broadcasting in terms of information. So therefore, community radio is also another sunrise area that we are looking at, and we are trying to push it as aggressively as possible. Mr. Sarkar was mentioning to me that perhaps it would be a good idea to allow the armed forces to have community radio stations in each of their cantonments. You know, if at all the armed forces do come forward and they feel that they would require community radios in their cantonments or to cater to their specific needs, we would be more than happy to facilitate that process, because I think it would only add to the diversity and the plurality of content. So, to sum up, in the last 2 decades, there has been this exponential march of technology. And one of the greatest arts of survival is to try and keep in step with the changes in technology which have taken place. There are legacy technologies which have played a role in building up the entire broadcasting paradigm in this country, or the broadcasting infrastructure in this country. But everything, you know, does come with a certain time stamp. It does come with a certain expiry date. And I think it would be worth the while of the Broadcasting Engineering Society and all of you, you know, very bright minds who've gathered here from not only across India but across the world, to apply yourself as to how and what technologies India would require, the Indian broadcasting paradigm would require, as we look from 2014 to possibly 2034. And I must conclude by saying that one of the most ambitious experiments, or one of the most ambitious initiatives which the Ministry of Information Broadcasting had launched was the entire digitization exercise. Despite a lot of naysayers, we went through phase 1 and phase 2 of digitization. Of course, it did create a little bit of turbulence, did create tumult, and obviously, certain stakeholders were unsettled. Some of them made a very public exhibition of their unsettlement last time at this expo itself. But to them and to all the other stakeholders, I would like to say that the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting is committed to stay the course on digitization. We are evaluating the results of phase 1 and phase 2, but simultaneously and concurrently, we have not put phase 3 and phase 4 on hold. We are going ahead with the preparations, but we only want to do phase 3 and phase 4 of digitization better than what we did in phase 1 and phase 2, drawing from the lessons that we have learned from that experience. Once again, I would like to thank all of you for inviting me here. I have a flight to catch at 1 o'clock, so therefore I would have to leave you, but I would once again like to wish the conference and all the participants and delegates all the best, and I hope that we would have some concrete takeaways in terms of deliberations from the end of this conference. Once again to you, Mr. Dikshit, Mr. Singh, and to all your colleagues, thank you for having us here. Have a good day, happy Makar Sankranti, and happy Eid.